All right, guys. Hopefully, you guys can hear me. Let me check my audio settings because you guys should be able to hear me now. All right, this one should be it. Should have checked that earlier, but I had to relog in and stuff, so I should have figured that it was going to do that. Oh, okay. I just muted myself and all that. Anyways, hopefully everyone's doing good on this Wednesday night or whatever. Been sick and stuff the entire weekend, and things have come up, so I had to delete the show until tonight, which is fine, of course. But yeah, we have a interesting show. Of course, we're going to talk about Bigfoot and surviving and doing stuff in winter, and raise some questions. Kind of talk about some get some bunch of pop ups. Okay, don't need to do that. Some new stuff on Restream. We're gonna talk about some winter facts and stuff, and compare natural animals to what possibly what Bigfoot does and how Bigfoot might survive if it is a flesh and blood creature, of course. If it's a supernatural alien ghost thingamajiggy, whatever, then you know there's other stuff that I guess it can survive off, right? But if it's a flesh and blood creature, um, then there's some parameters that it needs to kind of follow basically to survive. It needs to eat, it needs to drink, probably has to defecate, kind of a thing. So of course, in winter is a very harsh season, most undoubtedly, and a lot of different animals employ different strategies to survive or combat or just survive or really thrive in winter and stuff. A lot of people, even Native American times, actually a lot of people used to starve all over the world in winter climates and in the northern hemisphere, I guess specifically. Which gave rise to the Wendigo legends and superstitions and possessions and stuff. They would say, one of the symptoms, of course, would be a starvation that would lead to madness, that would lead to cannibalism. Of course, that would make you turn into a Wendigo. You know, uh, Basically, a family would starve and the parents would eat the kids, or the dad would, eat the family, and he would turn into a Wendigo, losing his mind, kind of a thing. And many different stories about harsh winters and starving people and being on guard to make sure that they weren't possessed by the Wendigo and engaged in cannibalism and stuff like that. And we see that with some of the starvations over in Europe and stuff, like in France and in Ireland and stuff with potato famines and stuff. How bad it can get. So in winter and stuff, starvation is mainly always on the horizon. It's never well, even no, never mind. So starvation is a big factor. It plays a role in basically every animal's life in winter and stuff. And there's a lot of different animals that deploy different methods to combat this, because this is the main thing: is starvation, and then getting food, staying warm, conserving your energy and stuff. So in winter, you're drastically burning up energy just to stay warm, much more so than to cool off and stuff. It's a lot easier to cool off. But once you get cold, it's very hard to get warmed up, especially if you're an animal and you don't have fire. We're going to assume that Sasquatches are not engaging in fire use. Although there are reports over in Russia and some of those places where They have known to use fire, and even in Native American folklore, they talk about even the little people, being able to use fire, and they have spears and things like that, especially when it comes to the elder brother idea of these creatures. Having knowledge, the same humanistic knowledge of building a fire and making weapons and such. So if they don't use fire, um, and like all animals, there's a couple different strategies you have to employ, and like bears, they hibernate. That's the most probably the basic animal in North America. Everyone knows what that does during winter, and they hibernate, and they transform their metabolism and everything else. They prepare for this process to take fold and stuff. It's not like they just go to sleep in a cave in one day. They actually stuff their guts and their bellies full of roots and dirt and different mosses and stuff to help plug up the holes and stuff so they don't but other animals actually slow down and stuff just enough to do like a torpor slow down and stuff, which is not a true hibernation. There's half hibernations, and there's some animals that kind of just slow down even for a day or two or days, and then they change back. And this is actually where even their proteins on a molecular scale transform and slow down. So we can assume that the basic easiest thing to conserve energy, because as you're burning through lots and lots and lots of calories just hunting or engaging in regular activity many times over, many animals, and I would assume Sasquatch probably employ the strategy of just hunkering down, conserving energy. Because if you waste a bunch of energy and you're not successful in your hunt or even replenishing, not even be able to replenish what you lost, let alone have an overtake of calories and food to stock up and stuff. That's why many animals stock up on their fats, restores before winter, of course. And like squirrels and other animals, they might have a stockpile full of nuts or berry such food so they can rely on the supply during winter. Sasquatch probably employs that with, dead deer carcasses in winter and stuff you could store at temper. But if they don't mind rotting meat and stuff, then they could store rotting food for a lot longer and stuff. I guess have a lot more bodies stacked up before it truly gets say refrigerated temperature wherever they may be. And then not having to move until you absolutely need to, and you can move when you want to, while your energy is conserved instead of like starving. Oh, you have to keep on going and burning through energy, and hopefully you can find enough food to survive, replenish your energy sources, and then have more to keep going and stuff. It's a very taxing and grueling process. If anyone actually, goes hiking and stuff in winter and stuff, it definitely is a lot more than just in the summer. I mean, it's hot in the summer, you're sweating, but you burn through more calories and your energy and stuff much greater in winter. So yeah, and basically, we don't know what their genetic makeup does in winter and stuff. If it's a animal that's from the northern hemisphere, even if it came over from Siberia and stuff and followed Native Americans across the land bridge, it's a winter adapted species of ape. It would have survived winter for generations and generations and generations now in North America and the northern hemispheres of the world. So, and with that being cited in the Himalayas and in mountainous regions and stuff, having an increased lung capacity also plays a role in being able to oxygenate yourself in winter, and of course being in high altitudes. But being able to do that more efficiently and having a bigger lung capacity is that you're able to conserve your energy a lot more. You're not able to have to work as hard in winter. People will have to rest, take lots more relaxing breaths, no matter what you're doing compared to, if you're always having to breathe heavy, 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 and you're just walking around and stuff, you're burning through energy, you're burning through stuff. And so that actually does play a good role of why they can survive and they could hunker down in a torpor like state, not necessarily a true hibernation, but they can sit and hibernate. And I mean, and really, I mean, as long as they can have patience and they have maybe some food stocks, they can just reach over and, gnaw on the leg of an animal or pop a piece of rabbit in like some popcorn or stuff, to stuff them, to keep them full and stuff. I mean, they don't really have to really go anywhere, because an animal that's hunkering down and stuff only needs to go anywhere if it needs to get food or water and stuff. And if you have resources in like a den or close to a den, then you don't really have to go that far all that often, especially if you're away from humans. Or and we see through what bears can do. They can make pretty small dens underneath fallen trees and tree roots and stuff like that. And, can fit surprisingly inside people's homes and underneath basements through the windows, as we see regularly happen in some of these western states where bears are, trying to hibernate underneath inside the basement. And you would think that there's no way a big bear can fit through a crawl space like that, to get in and get out, but they do and stuff. And I think Sasquatch is able to do the same kind of thing, and maybe even fit in and turn around and do a couple other maneuvers inside tunnels and such that bears might not be able to. They also might be able to build the dens structurally differently than a bear could, having hands instead of just claws, and then making true tunnels, which other animals and snakes and insects, they all burrow, they do their different things. Billions of insects disappear in winter and they miraculously show up in the spring. They didn't die. They're not really gone. They're in the environment and stuff. They're just hunkered down inside trees, inside the bark, underneath the leaves, insulated inside the snow and stuff. So even if you have a small hole or den gets covered with snow and stuff, it can be very insulated, as we know with bears and stuff. But with otters and stuff, and turtles and reptiles and frogs and stuff, they're in the environment in winter. They don't disappear. They don't. Not every animal migrates down to Texas, from Michigan during winter. A lot of birds do that, and animals do that, and generally big predators, and especially if they're on mountain ranges and stuff, they'll move lower altitudes down, so it's less harsh and stuff. But regardless of mountains, most predators will widen their range because they got to search a little bit more generally for active prey animals and stuff. But if you're able to, store your food, and or like, like otters and stuff, they make their dens and they can swim underneath the ice and catch food, and they have air pockets and stuff that they maintain underneath ice and stuff, and holes to get out and to get to the surface. If Sasquatch employed that same method of having a den, an otter den underneath a frozen lake, or very cold running creek water, or whatever kind of body of water that most people wouldn't want to go in, especially in winter, could be very promising and stuff, especially if, they build tunnels and they can fit a bunch of them in there and stuff. It's no different than what we see with a bear den and stuff. It'd just be underwater like an otter, except for much bigger. Alligators and stuff make their kind of dens and stuff, kind of a same kind of concept and stuff. And there are reports of these wild men making such dens and such, even in graveyards. That's was reported in newspapers and stuff. So, or living in caves or under sheltered rocks. There's many creatures and stuff like the animals that live in the Himalaya mountains and stuff that survive the harshest climates in the world of winter and cold and brutal wind, and life finds a way with dozens of species around there. And Sasquatch or the Yeti is reported to be over there too. So to think that, they can survive or maybe originated in that kind of climate system or are different kind of relatives of the same species, those who didn't migrate to North America. Clearly, they're adapted for, northern regions and winter climate and stuff. If animals that traveled across the barren land bridge and stuff usually were adapted towards winter climates to be able to survive not only that migration, but North American hemisphere. So, and the ice ages and all of that. So, relatively speaking, it's actually pretty warm compared to what it's originally was, 10,000 years ago, especially when the ice age was still going on and things haven't melted yet. And we see, simply that deer don't have any special tools or anything like that. And the only reason they survive is, they eat food continuously and they, have a nice coat of fur that keeps them pretty warm and stuff generally. And they're able to survive, and sometimes they'll huddle up and stuff. But in general, they just sleep on the ground, or they'll sleep in a thicket and stuff. They don't really have much cover. Certainly don't go in caves. Certainly don't go building dens and stuff. And yet, as long as they don't die from starvation and stuff, they can generally survive winter. And so their hardest thing is finding food. So it's pretty amazing and stuff. So there's also a couple other things. Bigfoots are reported having the big nostril cavities and stuff, which is could be indicative of the capacity to warming of air and stuff. Basically, large noses and stuff, especially if Neanderthals were built in temperature regulators and stuff. As you're about to overheat in winter, having a big nose can help regulate the temperature and stuff like that. And it also can warm up the icy thin air before it hits the lungs, especially if you're like in the mountainous climate above altitudes and stuff like that. It's where big nostrils, big lung capacities come into play and stuff. And because it helps you more breathe more efficiently at altitude or in winter and stuff. So that might mean they might have a specialized nasal passages and stuff like some animals, especially if they're from the Himalayan regions and stuff. They might have some pretty big sinus passages and stuff that might be able to help them combat the icy cold air that would make them be able to survive overnights and running and doing physical exhausting things without freezing on the inside of their lungs and getting sick and dying and stuff like that, getting pneumonia. But being able to physically operate in the cold winter environment, like like they should be able to if they're able to survive mountainous regions and in the winter environment, in the Russian winters and the Himalayas and the winters of Siberia and stuff, where it gets some of the most coldest places on record. And of course, Alaska and North America and all sorts of places in between. So you gotta have that special adaptation, and we see that just how physically strong and stuff they are, just being big and massive with muscle and stuff. That again shows that what is it, Birdman effect, where animals are bigger in northern hemispheres because they are able to conserve heat a lot more than that. I believe it's Bergelman or something like that. Anyways, so that generally size being just that big and stuff, they're able to conserve heat more efficiently than something that's small. But the biggest thing is having that intelligence side of them to be able to store up food and not be able to constantly worry about starvation and food and in all seasons and stuff, gives them time to think, to observe the world around them and stuff. And a lot of animals simply just are not able to do that simply because, well, their brains aren't developed enough either. But they're constantly always on the go for food, and it's like humans too. If we didn't have a good supply of food or be able to farm and stuff, we wouldn't have been able to sit down and build stuff, build civilization, look around, figure things out, think, look around and think. If you're constantly starving, constantly always worried about, focused on food, 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 surviving food, you're not going to be focused on anything else. And I think Sasquatch is an animal that doesn't have to, focus on just food and stuff like that. I think we see that with other great apes and stuff too. They're able to do more social interactions with the troops and stuff and their own groups, and compared to other animals and stuff that seem to be strictly, food driven and stuff. But gorillas and stuff, and they're all still, wild animals, instinctive, just like I'm sure Sasquatch would, just by living out there. But having that intelligence and be able to stock up enough food, have enough resources so you can sit back and relax and think and strategize and plan. You can plan for winter, and that's how humans have survived, is planning and getting ready for winter. And for us, we're not made for winter at all. I mean, without clothing, without the skins of other animals, we would freeze to death. We don't have claws, we don't have weapons to even hunt to get the food. We have to make tools and things like that. So winter survival for us is really, really hard compared to animals that as soon as they're born, they're up and ready, surviving winter if necessary. So it's pretty remarkable and stuff, I think. I'll read some of the comments, and I don't know. I was going to put the link in the chat if someone wanted to come on. I haven't been feeling that good and stuff, so I was even debating on having one tonight, but I feel pretty good, so we're just kicking it and stuff. Um, just trying to look at my notes. And the Bigfoot camouflage, the reason why it works in winter and stuff so well is because, again, the colors. There's many reports of people seeing, or in the Himalayan stories, there's a boulder on the side of the mountain that, catches them off guard and piques their interest, and all of a sudden it finally moves, and the boulder was never really there. It was a Sasquatch and stuff. And, when you're out there at night in winter, you can see pretty good, especially at full moon. But when there's dark colors and the shadows of the moon and stuff and the tree line and stuff, you don't get a good, you see the object and you see it's a black mass or something. And you're like, well, it looks like all the other black masses, which are trees and stuff, until you get up closer and then it happens to move or it doesn't look like a tree. And so that kind of a thing. So it is almost like, you watch bears, or you watch moose. You watch the moose in the tree line when it's winter and stuff, and you watch how fast they disappear in the brush and stuff, even though it's winter. And you watch how gorillas disappear inside the foliage and stuff, and it's pretty remarkable and stuff how easily these things can just disappear. And even deer, as long as they don't really move that much, they blend in so well. And that's just how it goes. Especially with our eyes and stuff, we don't see the movement. Generally, it's harder for us to spot. So the big lumbering objects just stand still, almost because they know that's how we operate and stuff too. So a lot of factors that play into into their survival and being able to hide from humans. But I think they make dens like bears. They slow down. They don't hibernate, but they slow down enough to where, as long as they're probably not bored and they got food and clean water, they don't really need to go out too much. They can wait on the coming of changing of weather and stuff, the melting of snow, adding of, additional inches of snow in the area and stuff to cover tracks. So I think it's pretty not far fetched at all, actually, because all turtles survive underneath lakes. They burrow in the mud and they are able to breathe underwater and stuff like that. Some species out their butt and stuff, and some frogs, uh, and insects and some animals develop proteins that have like an antifreeze uh, mechanism to that helps them not keeps them from being frozen and stuff. And then there are frog species and bug species that can get entirely frozen solid and then reanimate themselves um, in the springtime when they get heated up and it's activated by the sun and stuff. So the planet has some pretty amazing mechanisms already for life to survive in many different species. And generally, it's just the change of the environment that activates the mechanism inside the animal's body to slow down, to get ready to, on a biological level and protein level, change and slow down and react differently on a cellular level to be able to survive and stuff. So there's a lot of questions when it comes to genetic makeup and Bigfoot and, when seasonal changes or environmental changes or stress causes genes to react and explode. And we don't know what kind of niches and stuff that they're able to do and have. And so it's pretty amazing and stuff because we do know with natural animals that they have all these kind of almost superhuman features, and on a biological level, their proteins changing and stuff and slowing down, and their bodies and heart rates all slowing down and stuff to be able to conserve energy and to be more efficient and stuff, to simply wait and be patient and survive winter. I'm sure that Sasquatch has some sort of the some similarities going on, um, because it's just a natural way of things. It's just how things go. Unless you're a human, then we're kind of different. We're a little different than animals when in this regard and stuff. It's really is a mystery because we don't come prepared for surviving outside of you know the baby basket. Really, I mean, we're not like gorillas or chimpanzees or any other animal. As soon as the baby's born, it latches on. It can walk and run. It's ready to go, running, dodging predators, or clinging to its mama like a death grip and won't ever let go. Humans are not like that. We're very babyish. We need to be babied and stuff. So Sasquatch, it's if when they have babies and stuff, we're not sure if they're needed extra TLC for a couple extra months before they get able-bodied, or if they're coming out of the womb ready to go, springing, jumping, clinging, doing what they should be doing, like almost every single other animals. Basically. I mean, birds maybe not so much, but they're pretty helpless. Baby birds, but and for the most part, most animals are generally not so helpless. Humans are very helpless. So that's a pretty good, interesting mystery. But and also, are they giving birth seasonally to avoid winter, which most animals do? They give birth after winter during the springtime, and that's again, it's a biological defense against surviving winter. Because if you have a baby before winter to survive winter, it's definitely not easy. It's definitely a struggle. And so it's more reasonable to have a baby after winter and then have the next couple of months where it's going to be warm and nice and plenty of food and stuff. So on a biological level, that's why a lot of animals do that in the northern hemispheres. But Is Sasquatches like humans, they can just give birth basically any of the time where there's no real season or rut for them to, wait for, prime themselves to be ready. But so, yeah, it's very interesting and stuff. I think I'll put the chat in the stream if someone wants to come on. There's only a couple people on, anyways, but I don't mind as long as we talk a little about winter and stuff like that, and maybe if you guys have some questions. Yep, you definitely want to replenish your food source and your nutrients when you're out investigating Bigfoot out in winter, or you do a long, strenuous hike. And a big thing about winter too is you can feel good and going and going and going, and then when you finally stop, and that drains, the adrenaline dumps, we'll say, you get that dump after you feel good and stuff, that can hit pretty hard too, and hit a lot of people differently, and recovery time can vary, and you want to make sure that you're able to get back out if you walk yourself in so far, or you're camping or whatever. I mean, you got to make sure you don't overdo it and you're not able to get out of there and stuff, and find yourself in a situation where you might be starving and stuff like that, like that one young fellow who was up in Alaska and was camping and died in that bus. He was basically starving, lost, eating berries that weren't edible, and he thought they were and stuff. I can't remember his name, but it's a famous story. You don't want to be caught in situations like that, especially in winter, and not having very much options, or not being prepared, or that's just definitely not a good scenario to find yourself in. So, and also, here in Michigan, we get a pretty good amount of snow, but up in the UP, especially, they get a lot of snow, feet and feet and feet, like, gobs amount, to where, you can't really, it's pretty impossible to walk around out there without snowshoes. And Sasquatch, having long legs and being incredibly tall, could possibly either, wade through it, or their feet might even be specialized to where it acts like a snowshoe, kind of enough to where, they don't sink all the way down, but they're able to navigate the terrain, because it is pretty crazy. You get 11 feet of snow out there, and then you're sinking through the snow, basically, half swimming through it, depending on the consistency and stuff. Um, you're not really going to go far. Or if you're in a scenario where you're trapped in your car or things like that, it's pretty bad situation. You should always have a winter survival kit, emergency bag in your guys' car, with extra blankets and stuff, and canned foods, or um, something that, if you're able to have discipline, you can keep in the house and take with you, and you don't have to worry about the canned foods and water like freezing. But if you had something in the car, you don't have to keep the canned foods and water in there, but fire starters and stuff like that. Sparklers, fireworks are great fire starters. Once you get that sucker lit, that's a couple thousand degrees that will definitely start a fire pretty easily, if you have a nice tinder bunner going. So, extra blankets, extra coats, gloves, hats, stuff like that. Because there's always, you never know. Maybe a person who doesn't like to wear coats and stuff like that, or they like to wear the shorts in winter and kind of a thing. If something happened, you definitely want to make sure that you got a little extra clothes for them, especially if you have kids or your grandparent and you have grandkids, you want to have a little extra cozy comfort. If, you slide off the road and now you're, in the ditch and stuff, and maybe the heat is not working as well or good or whatever it may be. it's always good to be prepared and stuff. So I usually try to make sure there's something that you can use. And even without it being winter, it's good to have the survival bag and a bug out bag kind of a thing ready to go. Because I just had a buddy I just seen the other morning, uh, went and rescued a person up in the northern Michigan, up on a a place you don't want to get stuck. And he was my buddy said basically he got a kind of a feeling to take the back way, and this is kind of out of the way, a back way, and seen a car off the road a little bit, and hadn't wasn't all like froze up and stuff like that, so I knew it wasn't crazy long, but it was a person who broke down, basically battery went dead and stuff, car shut off on him, so they couldn't heat themselves up or anything, car's dead, and the guy only had like a little thin hoodie on. He didn't have a big heavy coat on or anything like that, and my buddy helped him out, of course, and had an extra coat for him because he needed it. And so he actually, potentially saved that person because, you never know. You get hypothermia pretty easily, and they say that it can make you do all sorts of things and hallucinate and have mental, uh, vivid imaginations of things. And people go wandering through the woods and you know strip of their clothes and then they die and all sorts of weird stuff. They'll strip their clothes down because they feel incredibly warm, but they're freezing to death, kind of a thing. And there's all sorts of crazy things that come into play with hyperthermia. So you definitely want to keep warm and keep yourself from going pre-hyperthermic or hyperthermic. Not going to make right decisions and stuff. You're going to slow down, it's going to dull and stuff. So like you might not make the right decision. Like like say you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're hyperthermic or pre-hyperthermic, and now you think it's been 10 or 12 hours instead of it's only been maybe like 4 or 2 hours or whatever, since that point of you being hypothermic. And you decide, well, I'm not going to wait anymore because I've been waiting so long. I'm going to freeze to it. I'm going to walk and go find help. And you make a unwise decision, and now you put yourself in incredibly more danger. Maybe you walk the opposite way. You walk through the woods. You don't even walk on the road because you're not mentally there all the way. And the search and rescue team coming down the road, and guess what? You're not in the vehicle anymore, and they can kind of follow your tracks a little bit, but the snow is covering them up. So now it's like, so you want to make sure that you at least have extra coats, gloves, hats, some hand warmers and stuff like that, just to keep you from, dying in a survival situation. Because, in a true survival situation, everything is playing against you, and every factor, everything that can go in your favor is dramatically adds to your survival chances. And when you're in those situations, every percentage counts for sure. So it is pretty important stuff. So I wanted to add that, of course, because winter does kill people. Winter has killed a lot of people, even though we're modern man and we don't have to starve and stuff anymore. If your power goes out, now can't get heat, right? Well, hopefully the power comes back on, but if it doesn't for a couple days, well then what are you gonna do? You better figure out something. And if you had some preparation already in place, it would drastically help you in those situations. You'd already kind of know what to do. You'd already have supplies ready to go. You'd be ready for that situation, and you wouldn't have to suffer or really, figure it out on the fly of what you're really going to do to, prepare for the next couple days, or, leave, go to other families, and what are you going to do with, pipes freezing potentially and stuff. All sorts of crazy stuff that might happen. Power goes out, and you can't heat up your pipes. You don't got the electric heat wraps going or whatever. It can be pretty bad. The people don't get nothing. Come on. Your guys' winter is like a warm day for us right now. I mean, honestly. So, but anyways, we're gonna have another show, um, uh, Friday or Saturday. It just depends. I mean, I have it scheduled and stuff, but we will see. Um, Talking about government and Bigfoot, and this one is going to be about media manipulation, Operation Mockingbird, uh, things like that and stuff, and how it relates to Bigfoot and all that grandiose stuff. We'll probably put the link in the chat for that too, I guess, if someone wants to go on. I think Friday night would be a lot better. But we got a bunch of other shows lined up, working on some stuff. Just not feeling that good this weekend, the last couple days, but still getting those push-ups in. We're gonna be hitting 10,000 by the end of this month, baby. Because you got to you can't be a couch potato all year and then go running around the woods looking for these guys and expecting a pretty good result, expecting not to hurt yourself, expecting to be the best that you can be when you just sat on the couch and didn't really do anything. You didn't work out, you didn't better yourself or whatever. I mean, and I think if the media wants, if we were it, if the media probably would have a lot harder time making fun of us if we didn't look like a stereotypical fat hillbilly who's out there chasing Bigfoot. Where I mean, they I mean, it's just how it is. They look at some of these male researchers and they're like, yeah, okay, buddy, you're going out there looking for Bigfoot and you're huge. You're huge. Okay. The point of the matter is it's very unhealthy, and if you fell, you could probably hurt yourself or all of that. But the fact is, it's pretty easy to poke fun of that. I mean, it's real easy to just laugh at it, and you can see it physically. It's like you're not, a person like that's just not going out in the woods that far. He's not, it's not happening and stuff. It's not happening as efficiently as if he lost all that weight and was physically fit and was out there. Have some pride in yourself. Take it fucking seriously. When you're out there instead of eating a bag of chips or whatever, then coming up with excuses of why you can't do some fucking push-ups at home or sit-ups or whatever the fuck, but you expect yourself to be on tip-top shape when you're out there running after the most physically fit specimens probably on the planet. I mean, you think these probably things have a little bit of fat on them, but they're not obese, you know. How's a big fat guy supposed to catch one of these things? It just doesn't seem right. It's like I think it's just been about 50 years. Maybe we need to change individually and do things a little bit better. Maybe conduct ourselves in a higher standard to a higher standard. With a little bit of discipline, a little physical fitness. That might go a long way. I think that's something people are neglecting. Then you have people say they'll try to trap Bigfoot by digging in 20-foot holes, Mr. Freeman, and he looks like he's out of breath just walking. So I find it just interesting. There's a lot of talk and armchair research and mental study, but there's hardly any physical education going on or physical discipline that makes me think, yeah, you're actually capable of going out there and fucking going and doing something, walking miles and miles and miles. There's some people it's like, yeah, they walk miles and miles and miles, and you're like, I don't know. And in winter, it's even more apparent when you don't see those people ever go out and do anything. They don't go walking in the woods. They don't go walking in the snow. It's much harder. I mean, if you can't even keep your balance on regular flooring and stuff, when you're overweight, you're not going to keep your balance in the snow. You're not going to keep your balance going off trail and stuff like that. So, it's like things need to change, you know? And if people get butthurt about it, oh well, stories aren't really enough anymore. There's plenty of story channels, emails, and AI, and you know, plenty of fake people, plenty of grifters and all this. So nope. I think there's a little starvation needed, a little physical discipline needed, you know. You need to call out the mental illness, you know. We know for a fact there's many people who are very nice people that are just living in a fantasy world telling lies, stories, made up fantasy stories to have fellowship in the community or, feel popular or whatever, mental illness or comfort or just comfort that they get. They're lying to your fucking face. I mean, and the people who want to be nice and say, "Oh yeah, I believe you," or accept that and all that goobla gosh. Um, you're not helping fucking anything. You're not helping moving the ball down the field. You're not helping prove anything. You're just letting it. You're enabling it to happen more and more and more and be accepted. And then now you have, dog man who saved rape victims and picked them up and carried them, and then that person goes on to be a Bigfoot researcher expert, has all these fantastical stories and Bigfoot and Dogman wars and clans and mind speak, and now they've written books, and it's like no wonder the media laughs at us. It's not that hard. No man, no wonder the government is laughing at us. Like they don't have to do anything in our community to really steer or push us away from what they're trying to hide. We have so many mental illness and fake people and fantasy bullshit that they don't even care. Most of it is fake, I'm sure. They just laugh the fuck out of it. They're very few. They only care about researchers who are actually going out there and possibly finding the truth. Then they monitor. Then they might send some people in to try to be in the group to to get some interviews and stuff like that. Try to find some information. But for the most part, they don't need people to fucking a fake patsy to steer the community away from where their actual mystery's at. I mean, there's plenty of fucking people who do that on their own. Bigfoots and bushes and this and that. And, you know, they're not worried about those people going on investigations, going looking for Bigfoot when they find Bigfoot in bushes and stuff next to their trailer park. They don't care about that. You know, that's who they're not worried about. They're not going to monitor that. They'll probably play into that. Maybe they'll have those people on their shows. All right, so it's been about an hour. There's no one joining the stream because I don't know, it's Wednesday night. It's a little late. I am not feeling the stuff. So this probably could have been a little bit Let's see. I think we did everything. Well, the one mystery that I think can be interesting is, what Bigfoot hair is like or fur and stuff, because it's not, what it's seeing and stuff doesn't really seem like it's fur, like animal fur, more like kind of tangled up human hair, which um, is it like our hair and stuff, which is not. No, I mean, our hair is not really efficient enough. It doesn't cover our body enough, but would their hair be efficient enough to actually act as a barrier for warmth and stuff? A lot of different cases, it seemed like some of them were like, I would say maybe like mangy, maybe not mangy, but like the hair wasn't as fully covered and balding and stuff like that. If you guys ever seen the movie Sasquatch with the guy from Aliens, he plays in it. I think it's just Sasquatch. That Sasquatch has kind of like missing hair and stuff. It's kind of bald and uh, doesn't some of those stuff is not really depicted as being able to cover up your hair, cover up and keep you warm and stuff. But if they are insulating and hollowed up and stuff and more thick and structurally animalistic while being kind of humanistic at the same time, at least that kind of look. Like there's some Bigfoots with like Fabio flowing kind of hair, or females who look like they just like got washed up in the hair from a salon and stuff, like it's really flowing and glowing and stuff. So like what kind of properties does this hair have if it's more like, animalistic like fur, how it should be insulating and stuff, or if it's kind of more like human and stuff. It might have some different properties, not the camouflaging of the light property either, but if it is hollow and stuff like polar bears and crystal clear, maybe it could do some of that and also be hollowed enough to insulate the Sasquatch too, like a polar bear and stuff. So, but until we, basically get a body, we're not really able to understand how that works. I think the government already has bodies. The government already has. They already know. This isn't like the mystery is already solved for them. Um, the mystery is why is it classified? Why is it top secret, stuff like that. There's a reason and stuff, or if they are maintaining the population, if there's things like that going on, that could be a reason for being a top secret. Could be some very nefarious reasons and stuff, and genetic reasons, pharmaceutical reasons and stuff that would probably be worth a lot of money. Pharmaceutical reasons, and because another show that we'll do with stuff is like Sasquatch and some of the biohazards and diseases and stuff that might come with Sasquatch and stuff. Other apes have diseases that are can be passed on to humans and stuff like that, and vice versa. So Sasquatch might have some things that might be able to be passed on for some illnesses, germs, stuff like that. Bacteria is what I would be more concerned about, is specialized bacteria that live on a Sasquatch, on their skin and stuff, and or in their saliva and stuff like that. You get some Sasquatch saliva in your eyeball and stuff, you might have a pretty bad reaction. If you ingest, Sasquatch saliva, you better hope that your stomach acid kills it, or you don't have some kind of reactions and stuff through its own bacteria that it has in its saliva. Because we know through the human mouth and stuff, especially if there's a lot of bacteria and stuff like that, like when you kiss people and stuff, transferring of bazillion amounts of germs and stuff like that, bacteria. Same thing with them, especially if they're eating rotting flesh and stuff like that. They're not brushing their teeth. They could have a pretty ridiculous amount of bacteria stored up in their saliva and in their bite. But if they're eating rotting flesh and stuff like that, you don't want to probably kiss a Sasquatch. It probably won't taste that good, but also, it might give you a rash. Um, Things like that, which is actually pretty grave concern. You know, Even they might even have some, diseases and stuff. That man has never really come across, or is an older variant of some sort of things, or um, I was watching Bob Giblin's the uh, his story encounter YouTube guy, uh, the young Bob Giblin, and his latest was one on a humanoid that was seen on a school field trip in Missouri or something like that, and it kind of looked like Sasquatch. But anyways, what I thought was very interesting was that it had all these like purple blotches or dots on its face and stuff, and that could, again, it could be bacteria, skin condition, it could be some kind of disease or something like that. Anyway, some type of biological issue that's going on with that creature and the entity and stuff, and uh, you don't really, want to be rubbing your face up against a Sasquatch face, because you probably are going to get a little funky stuff on you, you know, and that is a pretty big thing. So we'll probably have a show on that, talking about that a little bit. Um, and we just don't know. I mean, you know, until we get a body, or until the government really comes out and says, "Oh yeah, hey, we've been studying Bigfoot for however many years," and they give us reasons. Oh yeah, this is why you shouldn't go next to a Sasquatch. And there's like a hundred fucking reasons, you know, a dozen reasons of why it's not a good idea, and I'm sure it'd be reasonable enough. But I think there's a reason why they keep it secret, and it's a little bit different than just say a grizzly bear, which is or a Kodiak brown bear, or a coastal brown bear, I should say, because those are true monsters and stuff. But I think there's a little bit more. It could be a little bit more to the mystery of Sasquatch than just being flesh and blood. And if that was the case, then things would make a little bit more sense, a lot more sense when it comes to a lot of things, especially the similarities when it comes to um, when you hunt ghosts and when you hunt Bigfoot, the same similar, being zapped or electronics being drained, battery issues and stuff like that. Very similar things to totally separate phenomena, supposedly. Of course, UFOs and Sasquatch are seen in the same areas, and there's a lot of UFO researchers and Bigfoot researchers who would say that they even came out of the UFOs. There are sightings and stuff. So in winter, there are probably a number of reasons why we don't see them. Simply, they're probably just relaxing and stuff. If they're flesh and blood, they got a little torpor kind of state where they're just chillaxing, stuffing themselves with their. They don't have to go anywhere. They're not if they're not starving. They don't have to go anywhere. If they're not thirsty, they don't have to go find the resources. They don't need to leave their hiding spot. You know, Unless they're really going to want to mess with you or something. They don't generally have to move until it's changing of the weather, or it's melting of the snow, or they're forced to by some other outside factor. So, and there's probably, and that's the simplest reason why they don't see them as much during winter, or you don't see their tracks, because they're smart enough to know they don't have to move, they don't have to reveal themselves if they don't need to, you know. So genetically, they might even slow down biologically and stuff. They might be able to do some special stuff that we humans certainly can't do. And I think by being underwater or in a den where they can put a big fallen tree or a boulder or some other obstacles in the way or cover themselves up, humans aren't really going to find them. As there are dozens and dozens of dens and stuff that people walk across all the time with bear and never know that they're there. Plenty of surprise videos where people they don't realize it until the bear's coming out of the hole right in the ground that's right behind them. So you never know where Sasquatch might be in winter, especially if you got a chunk of woods or a little pond and stuff. You never know. He could be pretty close by. All right, guys. Well, if no one else is going to come on, I think we're going to be done for this hour and stuff. I just don't want to keep going for another hour. Kind of need to go to sleep and recover fully and get my 10,000 push-ups in by doing 500 each and every day. And so we'll be doing that. We have almost 4,000 now, or whatever the date is. Tenth. We do 500 each and every single day. So we're at 2,500, 3,500. Yeah, we'll talk about a little bit different Bigfoot government shows and stuff. There most definitely is people in this community that are on the payroll and stuff to monitor, to gather in the information, to gather those stories, gather those sighting reports, to go investigate, to get in on any of the big expeditions going on, say in Florida. That scared them for sure. The 168 that scared them a bit. Scared them so enough they sent a couple of their guys in there. That's how much that scared them. Not fake ass story channels or ravaging dogs barking in dark alleyways. Nothing like that. So, and also, I just seen this and was reminded, there are people who have died in Bigfoot. Apparently, Bigfoot's a dangerous hobby. There's been, maybe a dozen people who've died. Maybe some of them by Bigfoot, some by government. What was that one famous Texas oil man who was looking for Bigfoot and said he was going to find Bigfoot or was going to make a big old announcement at a big old news conference announcement and stuff. And then he flew into his little private plane. That was a couple decades ago, right? Yeah. All righty. Be on the lookout for that. Be on the lookout for more stuff. Be on the lookout for one of these. Well, be on the lookout. We want to show some evidence and stuff of some of the stuff that's happened in the last couple of months that you haven't seen anywhere else. So be on the lookout for that. Hope everyone has a blessed rest of their morning, night, evening, wherever it may be. I hope everyone has a wonderful time. And thank you again for spending your time with me. Until next time. I will give me a second. It's not loading up enough. All right. I will see you guys.